How are public schools funded?
My school is publicly funded, but really, I'm fairly certain it gets most of its money from parent donations and donations of various local donations.
Public schools, I know a couple ways in which they're funded, not all of them, but they are funded per student, and it's based on their daily attendance. The students have to attend in order to get the funding. They also get some funding from the area, like the property taxes from the area also goes into the school budget as well.
From what I know, from what I understand, funded mostly through property tax in the city local level, and very small portion of that also comes from federal as well as income tax.
I think the thing to understand about how schools are funded in California is it is amazingly complicated. Since the late 1980s, public schools have been funded through this constitutional initiative called Proposition 98. It was modified in the early 1990s. Basically, the funding looks at total revenues from both the state and the local governments, property taxes and state general fund revenues. And the Proposition 98 has a minimum guarantee for schools. But under the main test that's been in effect in most years, there is a total amount of funding that starts with the last year's amount of funding and increases it by both the number of students, to account for the number of students, and a so-called price factor, which is per capita personal income.
We have a minimum guarantee of funding, and that is based on the combination of what comes in from property taxes to our local governments and what comes to the general fund of the state.
How has funding changed?
There's been cuts just to balance out the deficit and stuff, and that's been affecting a lot of people. So
What I understand, the funding has been steadily been more of a problem and going down. Hence, lots of budget cuts and teacher layoffs.
Well, I think by any measure, the amount of school funding has fallen pretty significantly over the last few years. I think if you go back to, say, the year 2000, education's share of the budget has fallen pretty significantly. And then if you start in 2007, when the state experienced this major recession, school funding has actually declined in absolute terms. Per student funding has declined sharply. If you compare California to other states, our per student funding levels have always been kind of at or below the national average, but in recent years, since 2007, has fallen to, depending on which measure you use, either in the high 30s out of the 50 states or as low as 46 or 47.
Part of the way that we've coped with difficulties in the budget is that there have been deferrals, and so the K through 12 or K through 14 guarantee that Prop 98 gives us has included in many of these recent years deferrals. School budgets have had to accept the idea that there will be cuts that theoretically will be made up in the future.
Prop 98 ensures that school funding keeps pace with economic growth. California spends below the national average with test scores among the lowest in the nation.